Welcome to the tutorial on business ethics. Today the chapter is philosophical ethics and business. In this tutorial, our main focus should be on ethical frameworks. Ethical traditions in philosophy reflect common ways to think and reason about how we should live and what we should do. Mainly there are three types of traditions of ethical framework. The first one is ethics of consequences, which is also known as utilitarianism, and the second one is ethics of principles or standard, and the third one is ethics of personal character, which is also known as virtue ethics. However, the ethical frameworks can be divided into three traditions. The first one is consequences or utilitarianism. Second one is ethics on the basis of principles or standard, and ethics on the basis of personal character or virtue ethics. And this ethical framework try to answer the question about how should human beings live their lives, as well as there is another question to get the framework, that is known as what am I going to do today and why. We have already learned that there are three types of ethical framework. The first one is utilitarianism, which is also known as consequential ethics, and the second one is principle based framework or principle based ethics, and third one is virtue ethics. This utilitarianism is an ethical tradition that directs us to decide based on overall consequences of our acts. That's why this utilitarianism is also known as consequential ethics. That means we should take decision considering the consequence. And the second one is principle based framework. This ethical framework directs us to act on the basis of moral principles or standard. As for example, respecting human rights, it's a standard. So we should work or act on the basis of standard or principle. And the third one is virtue ethics, which is also known as ethics on the basis of personal integrity. Here we can see virtue ethics tells us to consider the moral character of individuals and how various character traits can contribute. That means this virtue ethics is on the basis of personal integrity or personal character. Now we are going to see the ethical framework of utilitarianism in details. Here we can see utilitarianism has been called as a consequential approach to ethics and social policy, and in this utilitarianism we should act in ways that produce better consequences than the alternatives we are considering. And this consequentialist theories or utilitarianism determine the right and wrong on the basis of consequences of actions. And in this utilitarianism we should follow one rule, that is called the greatest good for the greatest number. And if you consider the utilitarianism in case of a business context, the utilitarianism suggests us to take a decision which will produce the best financial returns. That means in business context, this utilitarianism focuses on financial consequences, and our decision should be made in such a way that can produce the best financial returns. Principle-based ethical framework. Principle-based ethical frameworks is on the basis of fundamental principles or standards such as justice, liberty, autonomy, and fairness. And this principle-based ethics consider the rights and duties of a person whenever taking decisions. Consideration of rights and duties is known as deontological approach. Deontological ethics requires that the morality of an action should be based on whether that action itself is a right or wrong under a series of rules. That means in this principle-based ethics, we should take decisions by following the rules, and in considering the rules, we have to focus on the rights and duties. Principles create ethical duties that bind us to act or decide in certain ways. Duties might be derived from legal rules, organizational rules, role-based rules, professional rules. Duties arises from these types of rules, and by following the duties, we can cover the principles or standard while taking decisions in business organization. Ethical framework on the basis of virtue. Virtue ethical framework consider the character traits or habits that constitute a good human life. That means this virtue ethics depends on the personal character or traits or integrity of a person. The virtues provide answers to the basic ethical question: what kind of person should I be? Virtues can be understood as those character traits that would constitute parts of a good and meaningful human life. Here we can see some example of characteristic traits. We have to be friendly and cheerful. We should have integrity. We should show honesty. We have to be forthright and truthful. To have modest wants, and it's essential to be tolerant. These are the some example of personal character or personal integrity. Virtue ethics focuses on the characteristic traits of a person. That's why this can be also considered as the personal integrity. That means ethics on the basis of personal character or personal integrity. Virtue ethics seeks a description of those character traits or virtues that would constitute a good and full human life. The degree to which we are capable of acting for well-being of others, therefore, seems to depend on a variety of factors. That means our level of characteristics depends on some factors, which are our desires, our beliefs, our dispositions, and our values. People should be caring, empathetic, charitable, and sympathetic. And we can form or develop our character traits by learning from our parents, from schools, from religious institute, from friends, or from society. These are the sources from which we can form or develop our personal character or personal integrity. How does utilitarian thinking underlie the economic and business decision making? A utilitarian helps to underlie the economic and business decision making. There is a theory by Adam Smith which is called free market, and this free market economy is based on the utilitarianism. Utilitarianism continues to have a very strong impact on business and business ethics because this utilitarianism is based on the consequence of the future. That's why you can say utilitarian thinking underlie the economic and business decision making. How the free market is thought to serve the utilitarian goal of maximizing the overall good. As we can see, free market theory is developed by the Adam Smith, and this theory claims that free and competitive markets are the best means for attaining utilitarian goals. The argument in free market is that voluntary transactions make people better off, and so a system of such transaction That means the transaction in a free market economy is going to maximize benefits overall, because under this free market economy there may be policy like deregulate private industry, protect property rights, allow for free exchanges, and encourage competition. So these are the policies by which we can get the maximum satisfaction, which will maximize the overall good. Free market is a system by which we can maximize overall benefit. Are there any challenges to utilitarian decision making? Yes, there are two challenges in utilitarian decision making. We are already aware that utilitarian decision making is on the basis of consequence, but sometimes there is a problem regarding counting, measuring, or comparing or quantifying the consequences. Comparisons and measurements of the consequences are very difficult. The second problem is that since the utilitarianism is based on consequence, if we consider only the consequence without considering the ethical issue, that would be a problem, because the end does not always justify the means. That's why utilitarian reasoning does not go through the full range of ethical concerns. If we just consider the consequence while taking decisions, in that case we may fail to recognize the ethical issues. That's why this consequential ethics or utilitarian ethics has problem in decision making. The concept of human rights and how they are relevant to business. Human rights is a concept considering the ethics on the basis of principles. And under the concept of human rights, we think that every human being possesses an intrinsic value or a essential dignity, and that should not be violated. We also consider that each and every human being possesses a fundamental human right. That's why we should treat every human being with respect. If we employ child, in that case, child labor may provide a beneficial consequence for the employer, but if we consider the fundamental human right for children, these human rights should be considered while taking decision of the employment of child labor, because as an employer you should be concerned about the employee, and whenever you are considering the rights of employee, that means you are considering the human rights while doing business. That's why we can say the concept of human rights is related while taking decisions for a business. Here we can see three kinds of employee rights in business. The first right is legal rights. The example of legal rights are minimum wage, equal opportunity, opportunity for collective bargaining, and free from sexual harassment, etc. So these are the legal rights. The second type of right arises from the contractual agreements. Example of rights on the basis of contractual agreements are healthcare package, paid holidays, pension funds, etc. Finally, rights may also arise from the moral entitlements. Example, employee has a right not to be bullied, not to be lied, or not to be sexually harassed. So these are the three kinds of employee rights. And whenever you are doing business, you have to consider legal rights, contractual agreements, as well as the moral entitlements. And by following these three rights, you are respecting to the human being, and respect to the human being is a part of ethics on the basis of principles or standard. Are there any challenges to principle-based ethics? We are already aware that principle-based ethics creates rights, and whenever we need to define the rights, we may face two biggest challenges. The first challenge is there may be a disagreement about what rights truly are the basic human rights. That means which should be considered as rights. That determination would be very difficult. How to implement the rights in practical situation, there is another challenge. That's why there are two types of challenge. The first challenge is it's difficult to indicate the scope and range of rights. The second challenge is problem in applying a theory of rights to real life situations. Again I am repeating, principle based ethics creates the rights for human, and whenever we are indicating the human rights, it would be so difficult to find out which one or which issues should be considered as rights. That means finding the scope and range of rights is difficult because there is no agreement to find out the scope and range of rights. And another challenge is implementing or applying the theory of rights in real life situation is. I would like to review this chapter here. In considering the ethical framework or philosophy of ethics, there are three framework. Utilitarianism, that means whenever we take decision we should consider the consequence. And the second framework is whenever we take decision we should consider the principle or standard, and this principle indicates the rights, that means the human rights. And the third framework is virtue ethics, that means whenever we take decisions we should consider the personal integrity or personal character. So this is the summary of this chapter. Thank you.